Hi, John McElroy here, talking with Dave Andrea and Angela Johnson, both principals with Plante Moran. Great to see you guys, by the way, even though we're not physically together. It's great to talk with the two of you.
Thanks
It's
for
always
inviting
good to
us.
talk with you, John.
And of course, the reason I'm doing it is once again, Plante Moran's come out with the Supplier Working Relationship Index, which is measuring the way that automotive suppliers think of their customers, the car companies. In this case, Toyota, Honda, General Motors, Nissan, Ford, and Stellantis. And David, this survey has been going on for quite a while, right? And tell us a little bit about the history of it.
Yeah, so this is 25 years in the
Wow.
making. This year as well. The history, quick history, is that Dr. John Hankey, who's a professor at Oakland University, came up with the structure to quantify the working relationship between the vehicle manufacturers and the suppliers. And as you well know, it's at best, right? And certainly always complex. So it's a structured way that we have delivered a standard index over those 25 years that we can track how well the vehicle manufacturers are working with their suppliers and where there's been setbacks. And I think the beauty of the index is you can look at the macro environment and all issues that the whole industry is dealing with, and we can isolate it to see how well or well not any individual company is dealing with those complexities.
Mm-hmm. Angela, how many suppliers do you talk to? How willing are they to share what they think of their customers?
I think suppliers really welcome the opportunity. And, having finished my PhD dissertation in this area, when I was going through it, I got a lot of feedback that the WRI offers suppliers a chance to provide more unfiltered, anonymous feedback. They feel like they can truly say what's on their mind. Whereas when the OEMs reach out, which they should be doing, and they do, to get their own feedback, it does come with that filter of a customer-client relationship. Suppliers really embrace this. They use it to help guide their business, and they appreciate having their voice heard.
Well, let's get into some of the data because it's intriguing. And once again, the two top car companies, I mean, they've been at the top of the list all along, right, as Toyota and Honda. And Toyota really took a big jump. Even though it's at the top of the list, it increased even more. Why? How?
They did. Toyota was able to build upon already great relationships to help them traverse through industry challenge in a way that suppliers feel is more equitable and fair. So their trust factor went up. The other thing that went up on Toyota is their buyer characteristics took a huge jump this year. They were third last year behind Honda and GM, and they jumped into first place. And their buyers built upon already strong behaviors that help the supplier manage their cost, lower their cost to serve, things like being able to get paid on time, resolve commercial issues, as well as helping the supplier navigate industry uncertainty. They know what Toyota expects, and they know their role in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the important piece, is the business practices also took a large jump as we measured them for Toyota. So the corporation was supporting the buyers to do their job.
So this is very interesting. What you're saying is Toyota has gone to its purchasing buyers and said, hey, here's the standard that we expect you to measure up to, and they're providing more clarity on that and making sure that the buyers are adhering to it, or how is Toyota doing it?
I think Toyota has always had the Toyota way embedded in their culture. It's a very enabling view to a relationship. So they've always been strong in the type of behaviors that we see. And what's impressive about Toyota is that they can globally integrate those behaviors. So in response perhaps to last year's survey, in response to the increased uncertainty in the market, being able to reinforce those behaviors in their buyers go a long way with supplier perspectives of equity, fairness, accountability, and then trust.
Yeah. So they've had those pieces in place. I would also add that they were really stretched over the last several years. And I say that because they launched the Mazda Toyota joint venture, the assembly operation here in the United States. They're launching the battery facility as well. Purchasing supported those activities here. They were on the front line, and so now I think that the battery operation is still getting launched. They're past that, right? And so now we're seeing these large jumps because they're not as stretched as they had been over the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay, General Motors also took a big jump upwards in your survey. How do you account for that?
I think their leadership is driving the right behaviors. What is impressive about GM is how they have gone from the bottom of the list in 2015 to now they cut above 300 for the first time. And their data is exceptionally interesting. When you peel the curtain back, you see that they are still pushing back on lingering old school behaviors. They're still pushing back on product complexity that adds to cost to serve, to volume implications of changing EV strategies, et cetera. Where they are able to succeed is they also have been focusing on those enabling behaviors: accessibility, engagement, responsiveness, communication. Their vice president continues to get high scores. They've maintained that over 3 vice presidents. And by putting those behaviors in front, they're also able now to get relationships established. And then as those relationships work through transactional issues, they can do so with more win-win.
Yeah, and that's important, John, because as you know, this can be a very personality-based, right? And so where GM went through those 3 VPs over the last five years or so, somewhat they were cut from the same cloth, right? They weren't brought in from another vehicle manufacturer or in from another functional area, really. But we could see that the organization kept climbing through those leadership changes, and I think one of the things GM is they keep this survey in front of everybody, right? So with all the directors, the purchasing directors, the buyers, they see this survey continuously, and so they manage towards buying or better buying behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're really starting to see GM turning the tide on their purchasing culture. At the beginning, but I can see the signs.
Well, let's get into that in another minute, but let's talk about some of the other automakers. Honda, second only to Toyota, but it just sort of holding steady, right? It didn't make a whole big change there.
Steady.
Yeah, go ahead, Angel.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, yeah. So they made a 3-point increase, and none of this is pure linear, right? In terms of what we can expect and extrapolate out. But with Honda, the one thing, even though it was only a 3-point increase, both of the sub indices, looking at the buyer characteristics as well as the business practices, both of those did increase. So the fundamentals increased underneath, although it added up to a 3-point increase.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Where they have room to improve is their internal alignment. So their data showed them taking a step back in some of their functions of interaction. So engineering, purchasing engagement, the implications of engineering changes and the involvement of engineering. That offers to them a path forward as they focus on getting everybody on the same page who interfaces with their supply base.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that, partly you could categorize that as increasing unintended costs for dealing with Honda. And so if you think about all of the volume disruptions, the tariffs were just coming in as we were in the field with the survey. The last thing you want to do with all of those other uncertainties and costs around the industry is to raise the cost of doing business with you, that of the things that are in your control. And as the things Angela just ran through, those all worsened for Honda. So their unintended costs went up.
Mm-hmm. They did get better on supplier perceptions of sharing cost and sharing risk. Mm-hmm. So suppliers are viewing their ability to get through a lot of these industry challenges with more optimism, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and fairness is a word that's coming up more and more often in the comments coming in.
Okay, let's talk about the other three automakers: Nissan, Ford, Stellantis. Yowza! I mean, Ford and Stellantis especially took a big plunge. Nissan, which had been improving over the last few years, dipped somewhat. But I'm especially curious, Angela. Let's start with you. What do you read? What's going on at Ford and Stellantis? Because the numbers don't look good.
My read on it, my overall take on it is when you get into an industry that's being disrupted with economic uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty, suppliers are going to buckle down in a couple of areas. They're going to buckle down on their own cost because they need to also make sure they're delivering the best value they can to their shareholders. They're also going to buckle down on being able to reduce uncertainty. They want to know where their customers are going. They want to know plans. They want to know where they fit so that they can align their strategy and their technology. Both of those areas, I believe, are where Ford and Stellantis struggle. Stellantis in particular was back on the cost with the volume. Their Q4 volume drops weighed heavily on suppliers' mind, we see in the data. And the feedback from them had to do with cost implications of volume-based decisions, program cancellations, delays, stops in productions, etc. In Ford, what I saw in their data was also cost-based focus, but really a focus on reducing uncertainty, being able to have visibility to Ford's plan, knowing where they're pointed, and being able to strategically align.
Yeah, and Ford also got hit with unintended cost, an increase in the measure of unintended costs, and a lot of that pointed back to their organizational structure in terms of how decision making within purchasing was being made. That was delaying decision making as well as just the uncertainty of how things were going to come out. And so that's where the business practices side, the organizational side for Ford fell year over year, while their buyer characteristics actually improved somewhat. And some of those were in the knowledge category of how knowledgeable is your buyer about your and around your relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think with Nissan, we were in the field, right, with all of the speculation about a merger or some kind of combination between them and Honda, right? And so when you think about all of the, just juxtaposed, go back a couple of years with 2030 and how Nissan was promoting that. If you looked at the public deck for Ambition 2030, the suppliers were throughout, that whole strategy in terms of bringing innovation, launching the programs, the number of vehicle programs that they were targeting to launch, looking at cost competitiveness. All of those elements were really throughout their strategy, and I think the suppliers saw themselves in that. But with the Honda speculation, how did the product cycles come together? Which products get canceled? How do the two supply bases get merged to get the kind of cost savings they wanted to get? And that kind of speculation, I believe, hit Nissan, only took them back from the 30-point gain that they had a year ago.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you mentioned in the report is purchasing VP engagement.
Yes.
Yeah, Angela, talk about that. You seem to be suggesting that it's critically important for the vice president of purchasing to be engaged with their suppliers.
I absolutely do. So let's break that down a couple of ways. So how we ask that question is that vice president is engaged to build trust. And trust comes about when suppliers view the OEMs as fair, as equitable, and accountable. Vice presidents drive a lot of that decision making. So we took the groups because innately you want to understand why half went up and half went down. There has to be some reason for that. At the top of the list was trust in the OEM and engagement of the vice president. Their role becomes critically important. The three at the top have done that very well over the years. GM has done that over multiple vice presidents, and Toyota has the opportunity this year as they make a first shift in 14 years with incoming vice president to maintain that momentum and maintain that goodwill. It's all about building goodwill and then being able to use that goodwill to have more favorable outcomes.
Yeah, and that goes. I think one point to bring out with Stellantis is if we look, the one question about for the vice president of purchasing, building trusting relationships, and of course that's Marla Bittis, that jumped up, right? Because Marlo has been out there. She's been on all of these webinars. She's out at conferences. She's pushing herself as well as pushing her buyers to get them out into the supplier operations to better understand the supplier issues, and that shows. But she's one person, right? You have to get the rest of the organization and the whole corporation to go along with that.
They did have in there.
Purchasing's kind of easy for the purchasing people to measure. You buy a part, you pay so much, they delivered or they didn't, it was good quality or it wasn't. But in the report, you also talk about intangible costs. And I guess you could also say intangible benefits. Could you touch on that just a minute as well?
Sure. When you think about launch quality and standing by side with the vehicle manufacturer, who does the supplier send, right? And we do have questions in there about do you put your A team on the customer's account, and it does match up. The higher the WRI, which is the lower cost to serve, the better cost to serve, the A teams get assigned. The old one, John, if you ask the suppliers, if they get and it's natural, it's human nature. If they get a call from somebody who's good to work with, who's responsive, who's fair, if they get two phone calls on the same afternoon for a crisis call, which one are they going to return the phone call to, right? And that's just the nature of the industry from that standpoint. And that's where it's building up goodwill that you don't know when exactly you need to call on that favor. But when you need to call on the favor, you want to have the goodwill built up so that the supplier comes in behind you. And one last thing, I mean, you can, purchasing, you're right, is about cost, quality, and delivery. When everything's perfect, right? But when you have to do the workarounds to get the production out, or the workarounds to get a secondary a supply, right, because some other constraint has come into the system, that's where it's person to person, that you work it out. And in a time like this, with all of these simultaneous pressures on the industry, more often than not, it is the human interaction, the war rooms, the crisis teams that get the industry through all of this.
Mm-hmm. There's a side to that. If you talk about tangible cost or intangible cost to the supply base, I look at those costs as the cost of transactional efficiency. So again, there's zero focused in on being able to get paid on time, get issues resolved on time, to get decisions made on time. Their own efficiency, their ability to use their resources wisely, to not waste resource time, to be able to maintain steady operations within their own facilities, those have real cost to the suppliers. But they're a tangential outcome to the things that are more measurable.
Yeah, and most of those elements are more within a company's control. So you want to minimize those as best that you can. So all those things that you can't control, right? You at least have a better, you approach those uncontrollable risks and costs in a better way, because it's a lower cost to serve on all those elements, the efficiencies that Angela ran through.
Look, we're going to have to wrap this up now, but I always love talking to you guys about the study. It's always very revealing as to what's going on. It's a little disappointing to see automakers sinking down. You know, it was just, I don't know, it seems like a few years ago when they all seemed to be on the upward swing. But I love the fact that you track this, because it gives us, you know, pretty accurate data as what suppliers think of their customers, the car companies.
It
So
really
David,
does.
yeah, it does. So Dave and Angela, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate the latest update on the index.
Very
Thank
good.
you so much for having us. It was a pleasure to meet you, John.
Thanks for the conversation, John.
Do you want to see the automotive industry grow and thrive? So do we. That's why we dedicate our shows to providing the people in the industry with important data and information, and access to the people who are driving the industry forward with the guests that we bring on our shows and the interviews that we conduct. But we need your help to continue doing it. That's why I'm asking you to support Autoline with a YouTube or Patreon membership. It'll get you extra content that will be available only to members, but it will especially make sure that you and Autoline continue to drive the automotive industry forward.